This country was founded on white supremacy, and every single institution and structure that we have in our country still reflects the legacy of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and suppression, even in our democracy.
There's a wall of mistrust put up one racist act at a time, not just from what's happened in the past, but from what's happening around the country in the present.
There is a purposeful agenda to foment racism that keeps us apart.
We have to start by restoring and dealing with and rooting out systematic racism built into our laws, our politics, our institutions.
We have a criminal justice system plagued by racism.
As president, I will take on institutional racism directly. I will look into every issue that plagues this country.
We have to go much deeper into a country whose very foundation is racism.
I know that there is systemic racism in our criminal justice system.
And for communities of color that have stared down structural racism for generations, the disaster has hit even harder.
True justice means that we don't have a racist criminal justice system that kills and imprisons Black Americans.
We can't be blind to the impact of generations of racism and white supremacy that were written into our laws over centuries.
White supremacists being radicalized, and when the leader of the free world can't condemn that.
We need to hear from that person strongly condemning and rebuking this ideology.
What the president has done is that he has given agency to hate, and he has yet to denounce it. And we need him right now to use his platform to say that we are all Americans and that we need unification.
But in point of fact, he never endorsed white supremacy or came close to endorsing white supremacy. That's just a lie.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. Hatred warps the mind, ravages the heart, and devours the soul.
Their response? He didn't really mean it.
We have also called on this president to say the words that he finally said today, but they ring hollow when he coddles white supremacists.
He cannot now stand back and say, oh, I condemn white supremacy, I condemn racism, I condemn violence.
It's the arsonist coming and saying they want to help put out the fire.
White supremacy, you know, I've lived here 50 years. I've never met anybody, not one person, who ascribes to white supremacy. I don't know a single person who thinks that's a good idea. I mean, they're making this up, and it's a talking point which they are using to help them in this election cycle, obviously.
We are the most racially intermarried, assimilated, integrated country in the world,
Exactly.
Tucker. You and I couldn't go to China and say we're Chinese because we don't look Chinese. The Mexican Constitution has had an element in it that said immigration had to preserve its racial essence. So what is this all about? And Elizabeth Warren did not fake a Finnish identity. She didn't say, I want to be the first Finnish professor at Harvard. And Beto O'Rourke didn't say, my name is Fritz. I'm Fritz O'Rourke because I want to take advantage of all this white privilege. And people don't trill their names or put compound names. And what's the force around Ancestry.com or 23andMe? It's to find some background that in this racially intermingled and assimilated society that we don't know exists, and maybe we can find something that's not white that we can translate into careerist advantage in the fashion of Elizabeth Warren or Beto O'Rourke or Rachel Dolezal.
Here's a question. If white privilege is real, and everyone in our ruling class seems to assume it is, if it's real, then why are so many people pretending not to be white? It's not just Rachel Dolezal or Elizabeth Warren. In the Varsity Blues college cheating scandal, parents were told to invent fake non-white heritage for their kids in order to improve their chances of getting into elite schools. One person who may not be surprised to learn this is Joseph Ingham. He's the author of Almost Black, How I Got Into Medical School by Pretending I Am Black. He joins us tonight. Joseph, thanks very much for coming on. So it does make you wonder, and this is not in any way an attempt to pretend that American history isn't real, the ugly parts of it, of course, it is real. But this idea that white privilege is the dominant fact of American life is challenged, I would say, by this fact. Wouldn't you say?
Well, the Varsity Blues admissions scandal kind of shows that white privilege is somewhat of an archaic notion. Because, in fact, Rick Singer advises clients to lie, as you said. It's actually quite common for white people and Asian Americans to lie about their race in order to get admission to school. They call it the Pocahontas factor. I did it. You mentioned Senator Elizabeth Warren. They do it because they know it can improve their chance of admission.
I'm Jay Feza from The Rebel, and let me explain to you why white privilege is bullshit. Here's a fact. Whites as a racial group do not have the highest household median income in America. Asians do. According to the Institute on Assets and Social Policy, Asian American median household income is $57,000 per year. White Americans, on the other hand, have a household median income of $48,000 per year. If we break this down by ethnicity, you really start to see the wealth gaps. Japanese American households make $70,000 a year, while French American households make $63,000 a year. Iranian American households make $66,000 a year, while Dutch American households make $59,000 a year. In fact, the three ethnic groups that, on average, make the most household income in America by descending order are Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, and Taiwanese Americans. How can the notion of white privilege exist when non-white racial groups make more money than whites in purely economic terms?
Now, as an admissions consultant for sosadmissions.com, I recommend that my clients not disclose their race. If you are Asian American or white, do not disclose your race in your application for college or graduate school, as it can be shown statistically to reduce your chances of admission.
White privilege is a way to silence anybody who is not of color. That's what white privilege is. It is just a leftist bullshit term that means shut up because you are not a member of a minority group, a privileged minority group in the leftist space. It's reverse racism of the highest order. You're basically saying to white people who aren't racist, and you can't find any proof of their racism, that they must be racist because they're white. That is called racism. If you are accusing somebody of something simply because of the color of their skin without any evidence, that's called racism, gang.
An exchange that took place on the radio yesterday between host David Webb and legal analyst Ariva Martin was pretty embarrassing for her.
That's a whole nother long conversation about white privilege and things that you have the privilege of doing that people of color don't have the privilege of.
How do I have the privilege of white privilege?
David, by virtue of being a white male, you have white privilege.
Ariva, I hate to break it to you, but you should have been better prepped. I'm black.
They claim that because blacks on average make less household income and less money than whites in general, that's a sign that our economic systems have fallen and we're living in a racist society. Ooh, boogeyman, the economic system is against you. Despite their claim, though, certain black ethnicities like Nigerians and Ghanaians are well off. Nigerian household income is $61,000 per year. Ghanaian household income is $57,000 per year. How can liberals argue that we live in a society that economically disenfranchises blacks when Nigerian Americans have a higher household income than Dutch Americans and French Americans, and Ghanaian Americans have a higher household income than Albanian Americans, for instance? The question that any honest intellectual should ask themselves is, why do these particular black ethnicities have a much higher household income than other black ethnicities and even higher income than other white ethnicities? And this is when you start to see the logic of white privilege fall apart as a concept. We're supposed to believe that there's this racist economic system out there oppressing minorities, when in reality, the economic problems minorities face in our society are almost entirely caused by their own actions or lack thereof. It's almost entirely caused by the negative aspects of culture.
They're polluting our kids on college campuses by teaching them about white privilege. So what they're polluting the minds of young people, both black and white young people, that somehow that if you have higher income, your kids go to better schools and they achieve more, that is some kind of privilege. I think that they should change it. They ought to get rid of the concept of white privilege and just call it achievement. Today, there's a 75% illegitimacy rate among black people. And so a lot of professors and leftists will say, oh, well, this is a legacy of slavery, to break down the black family. But in 1938, the illegitimacy rate among black people was 11%. In 1960, only 22% of black kids lived in single female-headed household. Today, over 70%. then also the poverty rate among blacks is 37%. However, blacks that can be characterized as married and working, the poverty rate is only 8%, and it's been that way for several decades. And the poverty rate among blacks who have two people working, mother and father working in the family, the poverty rate is 5%. And so you pick up the huge poverty rate in female-headed households, and that applies to whites as well. That is, female-headed white households are poorer than intact households. And so there are only 4 things that you have to do to avoid living in poverty, and it's not rocket science. That is, 1, graduate from high school. 2, don't have children before you get married. 3, take any kind of job. And 4, stay out of the criminal justice system. And if you do those things, you will not wind up poor.
There's a reason why mostly a non-white population is trying to immigrate into a still majority white population.